Teachers, family, or friends, it makes no difference to these killers.
I am a really bad person. I have done terrible things that no one should ever do.
Watch the most disgusting cases in which these cold-blooded villains will face the consequences of their heinous actions after being brought up to court for murders of the closest people in their lives.
Disclaimer.
November 30th, 2021, Ethan Crumley, then only 15 years old, opened fire, killing 4 children and injuring 7 more, including a teacher. At the age of 17, Crumley entered a guilty plea to 19 charges pertaining to his fatal spree, 1 crime of terrorism causing death, and 4 counts of first-degree murder. According to Michigan law, Crumley is eligible for the harshest punishment possible, which is life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Sentence of the court is that defendant shall serve life without the possibility of parole.
Crumley behaved in an unnervingly composed and antagonistic manner in the courtroom. He held his composure as the proof of his wrongdoing was presented. His silence was especially apparent when Judge Kamal Rao announced that he will be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Crumley hardly raised an eyebrow, clearly displaying no regret or sadness.
For everything that we have experienced that's hard and felt impossible, the shooter, this monster, should have to feel everything hard and painful and impossible for the rest of his life. The closest thing we can get to that is life in prison.
Judge Rao clarified that Crumley's actions, both prior to and following the incident, had an impact on his choice. The judge emphasized that Crumley's preoccupation with violence predated the attack. His unsettling writings and documented animal abuse made this clear. Crumley persisted in interacting with violent content even after his incarceration, gaining access to explicit films on a tablet by getting over jail security. Judge Rao came to the conclusion that Crumley was unlikely to gain from rehabilitation as a result of his persistent obsession.
On November 30th, 2021, 4 beautiful people were taken from this earth and 7 others wounded through a senseless act of evil. I believe that the Oxford High School shooter should remain in jail for the remainder of his life and be sentenced to life without the chance of parole.
Serious legal repercussions are also awaiting Crumley's parents, James and Jennifer Crumley. They are accused of giving their son easy access to the firearm used in the massacre and disobeying his request for mental health treatment, which has led to charges of involuntary manslaughter. According to the accusations made against them, the terrible events were partly caused by their incompetence. This case is being tried for the first time ever.
We were good parents. We were the average family. We weren't perfect.
I have cried for you and the loss of your children more times than I can count.
The prosecution used Crumley's planned attack as grounds for a life sentence without the prospect of parole during the trial. They produced evidence, including audio messages in which Crumley declared his intention to carry out school shootings and looked forward to the enjoyment he would have. Prosecutors emphasized that Crumley had plenty of opportunity to make alternate decisions despite coming from a challenging household. Yet, he went ahead with his lethal plot.
Is it true on November the 30th, 2021, when you obtained the firearm, it was not kept in a locked container or a safe?
Yes, it was not locked.
However, Crumley's defense lawyer, Pat Lofton, asked the judge to take into account Crumley's difficult background and his disregarded pleas for mental health treatment in order to make the case for a parole hearing. Lofton believed that these factors warranted a sentence that allowed for the possibility of improvement down the road. Following the impact statements and tearful accounts of the victim's experiences, Crumley addressed the court. He apologized, admitting to the horrible things he had done, and he requested a sentence that would bring the victim's family some measure of justice. His apology, however, had little effect on the judge's ruling.
I do not diminish any ability to anyone who could have stopped me, of anyone of a school or parents. They did not know, and I did not tell them what I planned to do, so they are not at fault for what I've done. I am a really bad person. I have done terrible things that no one should ever do.
He is going to live out the remainder of his days in a prison cell. Just like in our previous case, this next killer will also waste his life in a jail cell for murdering his younger sister.
I mean, she's dead because you killed her.
Yes.
In Abilene, Texas, on February 4th, 2007, 13-year-old Paris Lee Bennett killed his 4-year-old sister Ella Bennett in a horrific deed. In their house, when their mother, Charity Bennett, was working late, Paris stabbed Ella 17 times. Paris's long-standing animosity for his mother served as the driving force behind this heinous deed. He thought that taking away one of her children would be the most effective approach to cause her emotional suffering.
I remember that a male officer walking past me into the bedroom, and I remember hearing him mutter, "Oh my God," when he saw what I had done. And I remember I just felt like I was drowning in shame.
Because Charity had a shift at Buffalo Wild Wings that coincided with the Super Bowl, she had left Paris and Ella with a babysitter that evening. Paris got the babysitter to leave the house at around 10 o'clock, which allowed him to carry out his sinister plan. Paris went into his sister's room and attacked her before 11:30 p.m. He spoke with a friend from school for 6 minutes following the murder before finally phoning 911 at 11:42 p.m. He claimed to be insane during the conversation, calling Ella a demonic creature and pretending to perform CPR when the dispatcher asked him to. Hardly past midnight, Paris was taken into custody.
I accidentally killed somebody.
You think you killed somebody?
No, I know I did. I feel so messed up.
Is she bleeding right now?
No.
Is she bleeding anywhere?
Yes, she's bleeding all over the bed. Because I stabbed her.
After being taken into custody, Paris was accused of capital murder. Texas law stipulates that a person must be at least 14 years old to be tried as an adult, although he was only 13 at the time. As a result, he was tried in juvenile court where he entered a guilty plea to capital murder, was given the maximum 40-year jail sentence with a possibility of parole after 20 years. Paris received a psychopath diagnosis during the judicial proceedings. Later on, he acknowledged that the murder was not an impulsive outburst, but rather a planned act meant to punish his mother, saying that he had had murderous fantasies since he was little. He admitted that he had planned the murder with the understanding that it would land him in jail, but his main motivation was to inflict the greatest amount of pain on his mother by taking both of her children at once. Because of the terrible nature of the crime and the extreme young of both the murderer and the victim, the case garnered a lot of attention. Had a tense relationship with Kyla Claire Bennett, her own mother, who had been controversially cleared of any involvement in the plot to kill Charity's father, James Robert Bennett Jr. It is thought that Charity's own drug addiction and subsequent relapse just prior to the murder played a role in Paris's choice to kill his sister. The violent trajectory of Paris was evident even prior to the unfortunate event. He has a track record of acting violently and manipulatively. In a 2019 interview with Piers Morgan, Paris reiterated his admission that the murder was planned. He clarified that his mother was the main target of his fury and that he understood that by killing Ella, he would cause her the greatest suffering.
Why did you have such anger towards your mother?
I spent a lot of time feeling alone as a child.
I'm always amazed, like, where did that feeling come from? Because for the longest time, he was my only child.
Paris Bennett is incarcerated at the Ferguson unit of the Texas State Prison, serving his term. He will serve his 40-year sentence and be eligible for parole in 2027. If parole is never granted, he will be released in 2047. Given his lack of remorse and the meticulous planning that went into his act, many are concerned about his being released from prison. You can't really blame them. The story of the young kid who killed his teacher is the subject of our next case. Philip Chisholm, the 14-year-old who brutally murdered Colleen Ritzer, his algebra teacher in high school, made a court appearance once more and entered a guilty plea to a new violent crime, a horrifying and terrifying attack on a Department of Youth Services DYS employee that took place in 2014, a few months after his initial offense, has led to the 25-year-old being charged with further offenses. When Chisholm was a teenager at Danvers High School in Massachusetts back in 2013, he committed an unimaginable unimaginable atrocity. He attacked Ritzer in the school lavatory, an act that stunned the entire country. He repeatedly stabbed and strangled her with a box cutter before using a recycling bin to carry her body to the neighboring woods. Prosecutors presented graphic details of the case, including how Ritzer was robbed, beaten, tortured, and molested. In 2016, Chisholm was given a life sentence for this offense, with the potential of release after 40 years. Chisholm, who has been found guilty, just stared blankly as the judge read his punishment, showing no remorse.
Court will impose a concurrent sentence of 40 years to 40 years and 1 day for the rape of Colleen Ritzer and a concurrent sentence of 40 years.
The violent side of Chisholm returned. On June 2, 2014, he entered a guilty plea in Boston Juvenile Court to accusations of assaulting a DYS worker. In describing the attack, Assistant District Attorney David Bradley said that Chisholm, who was 15 at the time, was able to get away from the guards at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Dorchester. He trailed a female clinician into the restroom, where he attacked her viciously. Unexpectedly, Chisholm took off his sandals to move stealthily, and brandishing a sharpened pencil, followed the physician into the staff shower area. Bradley described how Chisholm waited for the woman, 29, to come out of the restroom before attacking her. She was choked and pushed against the cinder block wall by his hands around her neck. Despite the victim's best efforts, Chisholm continued to strike her repeatedly in the face, head, and jaw. Other staff members heard her cries for assistance and hurried in to put him in restraint. With injuries to her neck, face, jaw, and back, the woman managed to flee while struggling for breath.
Charging the defendant, Philip Chisholm, with murder in the first degree. Is the defendant guilty or not guilty? And if guilty, guilty of what? On what theory?
Guilty, deliberate premeditation, and extreme atrocity with cruelty.
With composure, Chisholm answered, "That is correct, Your Honor," to the judge's question about whether he had admitted to the facts as the prosecution had presented them. The victim, who was not in court but gave a strong impact statement through the prosecution, felt some closure after his admission. She spoke of the dreadful and horrifying recollections of the attack and characterized Chisholm as a monster, adding, "After this horrible and terrifying event, I remembered the bruises across my face, around my body, and my neck. That emotionlessness, that ready-to-kill look on his face still haunts me. There are real monsters in our world, and Philip Chisholm is one of them." Chisholm's childhood acts of violence left a lasting impression on all those he touched. Established in memory of the beloved teacher, the Colleen Ritzer Memorial Fund continues to support aspiring educators with grants and scholarships. Ritzer, who graduated from Assumption College in 2011 and was a standout student at Andover High School, is well known for her vibrant personality and passion for teaching.
My opinion is that on the date of the alleged offense, Mr. Chisholm was not suffering from a mental disease or defect.
Chisholm was charged with 2 counts of assault and battery with a deadly weapon, kidnapping, assault with intent to murder, and attempted murder by strangling. Chisholm's already lengthy record of violent crimes increases with this most recent guilty plea, making his future in the criminal justice system even more uncertain. A second sentence of 17 years in prison. His acts have devastated many lives and have caused much grief and anxiety, particularly the untimely death of Colleen Ritzer and the violent attack of the DYS employee. If you want to see more questionable cops and insane arrests, click the next video on screen.